Hey, this is His Word Unveiled. We're studying a new book of the Bible, the book of Esther. We are jumping in today. So this is a book that most people, I can say, are kind of familiar with. Man, there's so much in this book. And the crazy thing is, God is never mentioned in the book of Esther. Throughout the whole book, God is never once mentioned. No really prayer to the Lord, no seeking out the Lord, and specifically speaking, we know that there's fasting going on and this weeping and wailing and this sense of going to the Lord, seeking Him through this fast. But God is never directly mentioned. So very interesting. A lot of questions even at the beginning for me, but it's so beautiful, and it's in here for a reason and with purpose. The Lord really just personally got a hold of me when I was first pregnant and explained that my little girl was gonna be like Esther before I even knew I was gonna have a little girl. Esther was the name that popped in. So I naturally became very intrigued with the character of Esther, with her heart, with who she was, and knowing how to pray even for my little girl. So with that, this is going to be fun. This journey and walking through the story, it's incredible. It screams the sovereignty of God. That's what this book does for me. It lays out God is in complete control. He knows what He's doing. He is reigning over all in absolute power. He appoints, He allows, things to happen, things to come to be. So we're going to get into all of that as we journey through this book. Cannot wait. This is so good, so powerful. We can learn so much from this book. So let's do that very thing. Let's draw close to the Lord. Let's allow Him to unveil His heart to us. Let's do what we always do through this ministry and just be totally intentional and purpose with our time and reading through. This isn't going to be like every other time or any other time that maybe you've already read this. Let's read it so that it's new and fresh, and that Father seriously just pours out this newness for us and into us, and that we truly are changed by it. So let's do this. We're going to start with the first two chapters of Esther. So hit that pause button, get away with the Lord, read Esther chapters 1 and 2. Okay, you're going to read, you're going to take your time, God's going to move, He's going to speak, He's going to stir things up, we're going to get this, we're going to be changed by it. I'm going to pray, and then we'll walk this through together. So let's do it. I'm excited. Here we go. Lord, we are excited for what You have for us. Lord, I pray that this book, though Your precious name is never mentioned through this, God, it's in here and You have appointed it to be. It's been established to be a part of Your word. I pray that the truth and power in that, it slaps us across the face, and that though Your name is not mentioned in it, Father, that we may see You. We may hear Your voice just calling to us and revealing things to us, that Your character, that Your heart just come alive through this book, through each and every chapter that we hit of Esther. Lord, I just pray that we see more of You, that we know more of You, that we grow more and more connected. Lord, I pray for conviction, and I pray for exposure within ourselves. I pray for just this sense, this stillness, and this focus of just being able to evaluate and ask questions, and to really look within and deep within ourselves, Lord, to just really deal with maybe some heavy things, or just the stirrings that You put within us. Lord, I just pray for real things to happen through this. We love You, and we just give You full reign to move, to act, to speak, to breathe within us, so that we can truly be changed, that we can encounter You through this study and through this time of going through Esther. We love You, Lord, and may You be glorified through this time. In Jesus' name, amen. Esther chapter 1. Let's hit it. Okay, just briefly kind of understanding the timing of this. It's so crazy why Esther would be mentioned right after, you've got the 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and then going right from there, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. Though Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, according to how they were written chronologically, are those end books of the Bible. So we started off hitting some of Ezra, and now we're hitting Esther and Nehemiah here in a little bit. But this time frame takes place after Jerusalem has been destroyed, after they were brought into, they're in this Babylonian captivity. Jerusalem was destroyed. Then even after that, the Persians and the Persian Empire, Medo-Persian Empire, were above even Babylon, defeated the king of Babylon. And then because and through Cyrus and the stirrings that God put in him, some of the exiles were sent back and said, hey, go back and build the temple of the Lord. So all this is taking place. We saw some of that in Ezra. So at this point, when Esther was written, it's that timing of the exiles were already sent back to Jerusalem. And we know by our previous chapters and books that we have hit that only a remnant returned. That there were so many Jews that did not return. I think we said or came up with maybe about 50,000 maybe that returned to the land of Jerusalem, that began building the temple and just being rebuilt on their land. But there were so many, that 50,000 was about a small remnant of the Jews. Many stayed where they were at, that those foreign lands became home to them because they had been there for years upon years and years. So the book of Esther lays out this story of Esther and her cousin who raised her, Mordecai, and they were ones that did not return to Jerusalem. They remained in this land where they had been taken into captivity. So just giving that backdrop, that's very important to know that the Jews were free. They were able to go back to their land, this promised land of Jerusalem that God originally had given them. Yet they were ones that remained, along with many, many more. But they remained then in this land where they were made exiles. So, okay, giving that quick backdrop, let's jump into chapter 1. Now it took place in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. Now, King Ahasuerus, he is a Persian king. So again, we had all the kings of Babylon. Now we see the Medo-Persian Empire is reigning, is ruling, is the superpower at this time, and King Ahasuerus is one of those Persian kings. Verse 2, in those days, as King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne, which was at the citadel in Susa. So this is in Persia. Verse 3, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his princes and attendants, the army officers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of his provinces, being in his presence. And he displayed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor of his majesty for many days, 180 days. This is a crazy long party where he is displaying how great he is. We sense so much just arrogance and pride in this king of Persia, King Ahasuerus. 180 days, this party, this celebration went on, just honoring him, just having all of his riches and glory displayed. Verse 5, when these days were completed, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days for all the people, right? So 180 days of partying, why not do another 7 days, another week for this banquet? His banquet lasted 7 days for all the people who were present at the citadel in Susa, so all those who were in Persia, from the greatest to the least, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. Then it goes into just how extravagant this banquet was. Just the hangings, the linens, the gold vessels, it was just this extravagant banquet. It wasn't like, hey, meet us out at the park and we're gonna have a picnic. This was extravagant. Again, just more of his riches, his glory, showing it all off. He's all about showing off what he's got. So this takes us down to, let's jump down to verse 9. Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the palace which belonged to King Ahasuerus. So King Ahasuerus, his queen, his wife is Queen Vashti. She is throwing a banquet for the women at this time. Verse 10, on the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded all of these guys, all of these names, all of his officials, his top people, the 7 eunuchs, it said, who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus. So the king sends these dudes to go get Queen Vashti. Verse 11, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown in order to display her beauty to the people and the princes, for she was beautiful. So King Ahasuerus is all about, hey, everyone come, look at all my riches, my wealth, look what I have, look how extravagant this is, this all belongs to me. And he's just getting carried away, and he says, okay, you guys go grab something else that's mine, something else that's beautiful, something else that I can show off and boast, and she can come before and she can make me look good. So he calls Queen Vashti then to come and be displayed before all of these men. Verse 12. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. Then the king became very angry, and his wrath burned within him. So then he approaches these wise men of his who are with him in the palace, and he says, what do I do? What should I do with this? Queen Vashti is saying no to me. She's not coming out here and making me look good. In fact, she's making me look really bad. And the king is mad, and he asks what he should do. It says in verse 14, the 7 princes of Persia and Media who had access to the king's presence and sat in the first place in the kingdom. So these men he went to ask what he should do. Verse 15, according to law, what is to be done with Queen Vashti because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus delivered by the eunuch. So he's saying what, according to the law, is to be done to Queen Vashti. Verse 16, in the presence of the king and the princes, Memucan said, Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but also all the princes and all the peoples who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, causing them to look with contempt on their husbands. That she was called, but she did not come. He is saying this is going to teach all these women that they can disrespect their husbands, that they can do whatever they want, that they can say no to them. And in this time, that's not what you do, that the man is ruling. He is over, especially being king, that the queen really has no say. She is to abide by everything the king says. If the king says come, she comes. If the king says I don't want to see you, then she is not seen. Pretty legit back in those times. So he's laying this out and saying, okay, this is what needs to be done. Verse 19, if it pleases the king, let a royal edict be issued by him, and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, so that it cannot be repealed, that Vashti may no longer come into the presence of King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is more worthy than she. When the king's edict, which he will make, is heard throughout all the kingdom, great as it is, then all women will give honor to their husbands, great and small. This word pleased the king and the princes, so that was what was to be done. Verse 22, finishing up this chapter, says, so he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province according to its script, and to every people according to their language, that every man should be the master in his house, and the one who speaks in the language of his own people. So Queen Vashti said no to the king. The king reached out to these guys. They said, hey, this is what's going to take place. And all in this, all through this time, this sorting out, this figuring out, this asking questions, he's coming up with this edict, God was all over this. And he has established, and we see as we get more and more into the book of Esther, that Queen Vashti, her time of reigning was done, that God was going to appoint. It wasn't about King Ahasuerus and all of his eunuchs and all of his officials appointing this next queen. God had this in the books. He already had the next position filled. He had her established to be the next queen of Persia, with this position of being able to say, being able to do, being able to make an impact, being able to save her people. So we're getting into this. This was all God's doing. And what a process it was. Okay, let's go into then chapter 2. After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. So after some time, the king is starting to think like he's not angry anymore. It's past. It's just king of Persia. There's no queen. And time has passed. And he's sitting around like, I kind of miss having Vashti doing whatever I wanted and pleasing me and being around me and being my queen, and what did I do, and was this a wrong decision? Because in verse 1 we didn't see, hey, let's appoint another queen. God was all over it. God was working it up, and he already knew who was going to fill this position. But in verse 1 or chapter 1, all we saw was, Queen Vashti, you're setting a bad example if we let you hang around as queen. So they booted her out so that it could be set as an example for women to respect, to honor, to see that, hey, the king means business. That it's all about putting the fear into these women and saying, you cannot dishonor and disrespect your husband. So Queen Vashti was out of the picture. That's all we heard in chapter 1. Chapter 2, though, now we see King Ahasuerus saying, hey, what did I do? I kind of miss Vashti. What are we going to do? Now, the king, back in this culture, we get into this touchy stuff that is probably not suitable for kids, but the book of Esther, it hits this topic of sex pretty heavily. So we're getting into that. And at this point, the king is probably like, I'm kind of missing that kind of sexual intimacy. I'm kind of missing what I had whenever I wanted it with the queen. Though the king did have concubines and other, he's starting to miss Vashti. So verse 2, here's the response. And here's how we know that this is kind of a push and a thought and a desire for this sexual intimacy. Verse 2 says, then the king's attendants who served him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, to bring in, to please the king, to allow him to just for his spirit to be revived, for this encouragement, for him to just be brought to life in a sense. I mean, he's a man, for crying out loud. But these men then, the leaders then over his kingdom with him, are saying, let's bring in these beautiful young virgins to please the king, to bring them into his presence, and we'll make something of this. We'll lift his spirits through this. Verse 3, let the king appoint overseers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather every beautiful young virgin to the citadel of Susa. So bringing all these young, beautiful virgins, all these young, the innocence and their purity, these young, beautiful women who have not had relations with a man, bring them all into the citadel of Susa, into Persia, to the harem, into the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women, and let their cosmetics be given to them. So they are going out into all of this district, and they are bringing in every young, beautiful virgin, bringing them into this citadel, into the harem, that this place where a whole bunch of women were, and there's purpose. And they were going to be given these things. It says that their cosmetics be given to them, where they're going through a process to meet with the king, and meet with the king in a very sexually intimate way is what this is set up for. We talk about Esther, and sometimes we miss this point that they're all gathered, and who's going to be anointed king is going to depend on who can please the king. Who's going to please the king of Persia? Whoever he's pleased with in sight and through sex and through this short period of time, one evening, whoever pleases the husband, he's going to choose to be his queen. So verse 4, then let the young lady who pleases the king be queen in place of Vashti. And the matter pleased the king, and he did accordingly. Verse 5, now there was at the citadel in Susa a Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been taken into exile from Jerusalem with the captives who had been exiled with Jeconiah, king of Judah. Now this Jeconiah goes back. This is Jehoiachin. Now going back to all three sieges of Babylon. So before any of this captivity took place, the first siege, the first time that the Babylon came up against Jerusalem, some were taken away into exile. In that first siege, that was when Jehoiakim was king over Judah. So at that time, Daniel and his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that was their time of being brought into exile. Then after some time, the second siege happened where Nebuchadnezzar came up against Judah the second time. And in this exile, that's when Ezekiel was taken into captivity. And along with Ezekiel, here is Mordecai. Mordecai and Esther then were taken into exile at this time under and when King Jehoiachin was king over Judah. So just giving you a time frame of when they were exiled, when they were brought in. So it says, with the captives who had been exiled with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had exiled. Verse 7, he was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had no father or mother. Now the young lady was beautiful of form and face, and when her father and her mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So what we find out just in verse 7 about who Esther is that she had no parents, and that her cousin Mordecai raised her. We also know in this verse, in verse 7, that she's beautiful of form and of face. So this outward appearance, she's very lovely and attractive to look at. So those are the things we gather just in verse 7. Verse 8, so it came about when the command and decree of the king were heard, and many young ladies were gathered to the citadel of Susa into the custody of Haggai, that Esther was taken to the king's palace into the custody of Haggai, who was in charge of the women. So another thing we learn of Esther here is that she is a young, beautiful virgin at this time. Because again, this decree went out that all the young, beautiful virgins would be brought into this harem to be under Haggai. Haggai is the one in charge of all of these women being brought into this harem, into this place where tons of women were, and brought in to be eventually presented to the king. So just a few things that we pick up on who Esther is. We also see in verse 8 that Esther was taken to the king's palace. This wasn't Esther saying, hey, choose me, I want to meet the king. Or, hey, choose me, I'm young and beautiful and I'm a virgin and I can go and, get out. It's going to be a competition. It's going to be hey, who can be better? Who can please the king? Who's going to look better and smell better and do better and all of this. We know and we see in verse 8 that Esther, it wasn't this voluntary thing. Like, hey, who wants to come meet the king? Who wants to be part of this little competition? Esther was taken into the citadel. So we know that's huge to know that. Because here's the thing. When Mordecai and Esther were taken into captivity, and then came this time with Cyrus where he sent some of the exiles back, I have no clue why Mordecai and Esther were not one of them who went back to the land of Jerusalem. Why weren't they the ones? If there's a whole book of the Bible dedicated to Esther and in this incredible story, why wouldn't they be one? If she made such an impact, why wouldn't they be ones to go back to Jerusalem? And we don't hear anything of the Lord telling them to stay. We don't hear anything of that they're seeking the Lord to know, hey, should we stay or should we go? We know nothing. So that's not clear as to why. But we do see the end result of the sovereignty of God in that, in the purpose, really, in their staying and what that does, how that saves, how God uses Esther in such a beautiful way. So they there in the land, they made that decision. They could have left. They could have went to Jerusalem, but they're here remaining. Esther now is taken into the harem of Persia to be presented to the king. So all of these things, so important to slow down and pick up on those, even make lists. I just made a list on the side of things we know about Esther and just laid these out. So that's good. It's so, it just opens us up. It allows things to be clear and kind of orderly so that we piece things together that much more. Okay. Verse 9, now the young lady pleased him and found favor with him. So the him is Haggai. Haggai being in charge of all these women, Esther being brought into the king's palace, into the custody of Haggai, we read in verse 8. Then in verse 9, it says the young lady pleased him and found favor with him. So Haggai had his eye on Esther and noticed that she was beautiful, that she found favor in the eyes of Haggai, that Haggai noticed that she was beautiful, noticed things about her that set her apart from these other women in the harem. And mind you, there are hundreds, I don't know if I want to say hundreds, I'm not sure exactly how many, it's not very clear, but it says that they gathered every beautiful young virgin into the citadel, every single one they brought in. So we're not talking like, hey, 5 women or 10 women or 50 women even. There were more. There were many. And Esther is already finding favor and being set apart in just who she is, how she carries herself, how she looks, how she's just presenting herself in everything. She is finding favor already. So the end there of verse 9, it says that he transferred her and her maids to the best place in the harem. Now, it's a harem. It's a harem where a bunch of women are coming and going to be presented in a very sexual way. This is a harem. But in this, we see even that she was transferred to even the best place. She was given the best treatment. She was given all of these maids to tend to her, to help her. It's a big deal. And even in this, just the stirring up within us, like, you know what, no matter how crappy of place that we may find ourselves or that we're put in, or the pit that we're thrown in, that we can see and we can have the favor of God by how we present ourselves even in that, by not complaining, by not being ugly, by not striving in this desperation to get out or to be better or to whatever it is. Even in those times where we're in a really, really crummy position, maybe just a crummy season even in life, we can find favor, the utmost, the max amount of favor in the Lord by how we just remain still, by how we, again, just carry ourselves. Verse 10, Esther did not make known her people or her kindred, for Mordecai had instructed her that she should not make them known. Okay, I had to really look up this verse and really kind of figure out. So I'm like, why wouldn't Mordecai want Esther to make her people know? Why wouldn't she be confident in who she was? Like, this was her identity. She was a Jew living in this province of Persia, being in this palace of Persia, being brought in with all these young, beautiful virgins, and no one knew who she was. And Mordecai instructed her not to make her people, make her identity known. So her name being Hadassah, known as Esther. Esther was this Babylonian name that was given to her, Hadassah being this Jewish name that was hers. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, why? Why shouldn't we be confident? Like, how is this supposed to teach us? Why shouldn't we be confident in speaking, who we are and making known who we are and being bold in speaking that? I looked this up. The Hebrew meaning of this: Esther did not make her people or her kindred known. Mordecai instructed her specifically not to. So this word in making known is the word nagad. And that word means, in the Hebrew, the original translation of this word means to front or to stand boldly out or to announce, always by mouth. So what I learned in this and digging in this is that Mordecai simply said, don't make a scene. Don't go crazy and boasting and saying, hey, I'm a Jew and I'm this and that, and announcing it and proclaiming it and declaring it. He didn't say, hey, lie if you were confronted, or if they asked, just deny it and don't speak it. He is saying, hey, don't jump in the scene and say, here I am, this is who I am. Be who you are. Let who you are be revealed through just your character, through the way that you carry yourself. And that verse really, really spoke to me. That so many times we can find ourselves announcing who we are, announcing our position, announcing our favor, announcing our accomplishments. And Mordecai just instructed her, hey, there is no need to be the loudest, to be seen, to be known. Just remain hidden, remain humble, remain real, remain just connected to who you are and your identity, that you're not moving, you're not being shaken from that. Yet you're not out there just proclaiming it and trying to bring attention to yourself, just in this humility. And what we also learn about Esther in verse 10 is her obedience, that she respected Mordecai. She listened to Mordecai. It says that she did not make her people known because Mordecai instructed her not to. She's listening. We just sense this obedience, and that's huge. That's beautiful. That quality, and just not getting prideful, not getting full of herself, not saying, oh, I know best and I know this. She's got this teachable spirit, this listening spirit, this just bringing in, this taking to heart, to really this trust and this respect and this healthy amount of fear in a sense of evaluating and of really not rushing into things, just in that simple obedience. So beautiful. So just more that we learn of Esther. So verse 11, every day Mordecai walked back and forth in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and how she fared. So just this authentic care and concern for Esther, and just this relationship and his raising her. And in almost the sense that Mordecai knows that there's something more. Mordecai knows that the seriousness, the weight of her being taken in and this process that she's going through. Okay, verse 12. Now when the turn of each young lady came to go in to King Ahasuerus, after the end of her 12 months under the regulations for the women. So these women, these young, beautiful virgins, were brought in from all over the place, and they had to go through this 12-month process. Like, this wasn't just, hey, everybody come in and line up. We're going in to see the king. This was 12 months. This was an entire year of their being prepared to be presented to the king. So it says after the end of her 12 months, it says this is in verse 12, for the days of her beautification were completed as follows: 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with spices and the cosmetics for women. So 12 months of this beautification process of the things that she needed to bathe in and be covered in and be cleansed in and just prepare herself and beautifying herself to be presented to the king. This is a long, serious, crazy, competitive process of who is going to be the best. How could you not compare yourself? How could you not be so full of jealousy and looking around and oh my goodness, I cannot imagine the pressure and the temptation of getting in a rut of that, of the comparison game and jealousy. Oh my goodness, in 12 months to just sit there and linger, 12 months to look around and see all these beautiful women and wonder, am I even going to be liked? Is he going to laugh at me? Is this going to be, and almost this unnerving, because all these women are virgins. They're full, just this purity, this innocence, not being exposed to these things, not having any experience in these things, and 12 months to sit on this, to try to prepare themselves in every way for this. Verse 13, the young lady would go into the king in this way. Anything that she desired was given her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. So they could have whatever they wanted. All these spices, all of this stuff that made them smell amazing, they could choose anything they wanted. Any clothing, any jewelry to deck themselves out with, their hair anyway. This is like for like the typical woman, I guess you can say, like, this experience would be amazing, that she could just do herself out whatever and have any jewels and and we heard that this king is all about displaying his riches and his glory. He had a lot. There were probably tons of jewels and gold and diamonds and rubies and all of these things that these women could choose from. And whatever she wanted before she was presented to the king, before she would go in, she could have. Then we see in verse 14, in the evening, she would go in to see the king. And in the morning, she would return to the second harem. So literally, this would be one night. They were brought in. For 1 year, they went through this beautification process, and they would go be with the king for one night. And in the morning, they would go to the second harem. That it was done deal. They wouldn't see the king again unless the king requested her by name, it said. So that was the end of verse 14. She would not again go into the king unless the king delighted in her and she was summoned by name. Verse 15. I love this verse. I love this about Esther. Now, when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter, came to go into the king. So it was Esther's turn. It was her turn to go into the king this evening. It's this night. Esther, okay, it's your turn. You're going to go in. You're going to be with the king, and you're going to come out in the morning. So before you go in, what do you want? You can have anything that you desire. You can pick any jewels. You can wear anything. You can, whatever you want, whatever you desire. And it says, when it was her turn, verse 15 in the middle there, she did not request anything except what Haggai, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the women, advised. And Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. Guys, I cannot imagine all these women saying, "Oh, I want that," and fighting over the biggest jewels and the nicest clothing and all this. Like, just this, I can see these women going crazy, wanting the best and the biggest and the brightest and the all of this. And yet Esther requests nothing. She says, I don't need anything. Whatever you see is fit, whatever you think is best. That Haggai, whatever Haggai advised to her, she said, yes, that's fine. The spirit of Esther, her just being simple, her being humble, her not striving, not being desperate, not getting caught up in these other women, not looking around and seeing, oh, she grabbed that, I gotta grab something bigger, I gotta grab something better, I gotta grab something, I'm gonna do this. Oh, she did that with her hair, I'm gonna do this. Like, we don't see that with Esther. She requests nothing. This just contentment and this solidity in who she is, that she's not trying to impress anyone. She doesn't care about what anybody says to anything. Again, this wasn't a voluntary thing where she's like, ooh, I can win this competition. Ooh, look what I got going on. I can go in there and the king would be all over me. The king would be all about me. Esther, no, she was brought in and she's like, this isn't a competition for me. I'm not going to try to win this competition. I'm just going to be who I am. She requests nothing. So this speaks volumes. This is the kind of woman that I want to be, that I don't want my eyes on anyone else, on what they're doing, on how they're dressed, on how they're speaking, on who they're hanging out with, on what they're accomplishing, on anything. I want to have my eyes on the Lord. I want to just know my identity. I want to be so content in just who I am, and not impressing anyone, and not trying to get anyone's attention, and not trying to please everyone. I just want to be me. I'm choosing to just be me. And I love this about Esther. She did not request anything except what Haggai advised. And Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her, not just the men, that she gained favor in the eyes of all who saw her. These women saw her. They noticed her. Because here's the thing, when we're trying to be noticed, it's they're seen, but they're being repulsed. Like, nobody wants that. Nobody wants to be friends with that. Nobody wants to be around with that. But when we're being hidden, and when we're just being simple, and we're just being ourselves, and when we're not striving and being restless and desperate and just full of insecurity, when we're just who we are, it gains favor. People see. They notice, and they don't notice us. They notice the Spirit. They notice there's something different, and they long to have that difference. They long to have that character trait that's just real, that's just full of rest, that's full of true, authentic, powerful beauty. So good. Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. Verse 16. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus to his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. Okay, verse 17. The king loved Esther more than all the women, and she found favor and kindness with him more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Now again, we don't see Esther seeking the Lord in this. We don't see Esther praying and going after God. We don't really know her relationship with the Lord. We don't know her connection with God. We don't know anything. This book does not give us any information on how she's connected to the Lord, other than just a few character traits of just really who she is, and this identity in who she is, and nothing, no spirit or characteristics of the world. It's all in the Spirit and the heart of God, in everything that displays, just of that peace, of that rest, of that goodness and that purity. So the king loved Esther more than all the women. That royal crown was placed on her head. Now, we can look at this and we can say, oh, Esther's so great, and Esther's got just this beautiful spirit, which she does, and we see all of these beautiful qualities in her. But again, we see the sovereignty of God, that God has a plan, that among all of these women who were here in the harem, all these women who went in and met with the king, all these women who had everything to display themselves and give themselves to the king, God had his hand on Esther, and he chose Esther for a reason. We know that there was some kind of something going on in Esther where the Lord anointed her, appointed her, qualified her to be the one who would have this royal crown on her head. God made her queen, not King Ahasuerus. God is doing this. God's hand is all over this. So that is so important, and that is powerful when we understand that God was in this. And it's just the beginning of God's hand being in this. This story is amazing, seeing the sovereignty of God in that. So instead of Vashti, Queen Esther was made queen. Verse 18, then the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his princes and his servants. He also made a holiday for the provinces and gave gifts according to the king's bounty. Now, we see here that This may not be crazy significant, but the king does not, say, okay, Esther, now you're my queen, so you come before. Let's see if you're going to obey the way that Queen Vashti didn't. So come before all these men and be displayed and let me show you off in front of all them. He doesn't do that. He gives a banquet to honor Esther. Instead of saying, hey, you're going to honor me and all this, we see the favor. We see the favor of the Lord upon Esther in that. Simply that the king just has a banquet for Esther to honor her. Okay, verse 19. When the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. So while all this is going on, through this process of the women lining up and being presented to the king one by one, this takes us back a little bit. And Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. So verse 20, Esther had not yet made known her kindred or her people, even as Mordecai had commanded her. For Esther did what Mordecai told her, as she had done when under his care. So this is huge. We see again the obedience of Esther, and not only the obedience of Esther, but that she took to heart what and how she was trained, what she was taught. So it says, for Esther did what Mordecai told her, as done when under his care. So Mordecai is not over her like, Esther, are you listening? Esther, remember this. Esther, all of this. Esther took to heart those things. She wasn't just obeying because she was obeying. She was obeying because she truly believed there was more. There was purpose in this, that it would benefit her. There's this beautiful trust and respect of authority. So she remembered what Mordecai told her. She was even living and walking out this obedience, having this obedient spirit, even when no one was watching. Even when Mordecai wouldn't know whether or not she was being obedient or not. Just this being authentic, being genuine. We see that in Esther. Verse 21. In those days, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's officials from those who guarded the door, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So they come up with this plan to kill the king. Mordecai is sitting at the gate and he overhears this. So verse 22, but the plot became known to Mordecai, and he told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. Now when the plot was investigated and found to be found to be true, they were both hanged on a gallows. And it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the king's presence. Now, we could easily skip over this, but this is so absolutely important to know this part, to not rush over. This is why we cannot rush over. Every single verse is important, and we have to read through it thoroughly. So this is so important, knowing this, that Mordecai is sitting at the gate. Two men had plans to kill the king. Mordecai overheard. Mordecai went to Esther. Esther informed the king. So Mordecai ultimately saved the king's life. It was investigated, found to be true, and those men were hung on the gallows. And the king's life was spared, that his life was saved. Not only that, but this was all written down in the book of the Chronicles in the king's presence. So what happened, how Mordecai saved the king's life, it was written down. Very, very important to remember that. That'll come back later on in the story in the most incredible way, revealing the crazy sovereignty of the Lord. So good. We have so much of the hand of the Lord being all over the story, all over these characters, all over the situation. And we see God's heart and his desire in bringing about salvation and saving his people and restoring his people and healing his people and defending his people. That's God's heart. So when his hand is all over things, that's going to be the result. When God's at work, when God's working, those things will be the result, because that's what the Lord is after. Salvation, restoration, healing, freedom, redemption, peace, life, all of this. So good. This one went crazy long. There's so much more ahead. So love hearing about Esther. We're going to get more and more into the sovereignty of God in this. This is good. Okay, I'm done. Thanks so much for walking this out with me. Hit me up on my next video. We're going to continue on in the book of Esther. So much goodness ahead. He's got so much to teach us, so much to show us. Let's be moved and changed by all of God's truth and really take this thing seriously and continue to seek the Lord with all of our hearts with so much purpose. Just authentic surrender, saying, okay, God, teach me something. Show me what you can do in my life. Show me how you can change my life. Overwhelm me with who you are. He's so good. And when we seek him with all our hearts, you guys know we will find him. Okay, that's it. See you soon on my next video.